the people's wrist. They're watching every move we make. We're all included on their list. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. The lunatics have taken over the asylum.
So it's about a week and a half into quarantine, which I'm very fortunate. I have a job that's paying me to stay home, even though I don't have that much work to do at home. And it's given me some time to go over some old show ideas, some things I haven't been getting done. And one of the things that I think should be highlighted is this notion of gender identity. Let's talk about gender identity, where this term came from, and hopefully we can try to figure out what it means. I don't think gender identity can mean anything unless it relies on pre-existing sex role stereotypes within whatever society so-called gender identity would take place in. Because, as we know, gender is really just sex role stereotypes. And it was a lot easier before postmodernism sort of took a hold of the academy to define these terms. Postmodernism comes in, says nothing's definable, there's no objective reality, and things get very murky. And I don't think the social sciences can regain its legitimacy because of this, but that's a different video. So today I just really wanted to focus on something I found quite a while ago called the International Bill of Gender Rights. This was something that some cross-dressers wrote up. They had been meeting in the 90s. These men have been very much organized. They're very well organized, and that's something we have to keep in mind, how organized they are. So this was something I found while doing some research. I, implore everyone to do some research, because once you start peeling back the layers of how things go and how things work, you are going to be more open to other ideas that might sound a bit more out there, like this is really just like a cover for pedophilia to become normalized. But hey, I'll let you get there on your own. Let's get back to the International Bill of Gender Rights. So this is something I found, and I will provide a link below, because they've recorded everything they've done. They're organized, they've recorded everything they've done. They don't think they're doing anything wrong in the pursuit of their own quote-unquote rights, which, as we'll see with this document, is really just they wanted in on women's spaces from the get. It's pretty transparent here. I came across this document when I was doing some research on SOGI, sexual orientation, and gender identity. This is a legal document that the UN uses in order to preserve the rights of gay, lesbian people and also transgender people. But as we'll see, these terms like gender identity are pretty meaningless. The International Bill of Gender Rights is based on two documents that were written by trans activists at the time. One named Joanne Roberts, who was in publishing and design, made magazines titled Ladylike, and a book, Art and Illusion, A Guide to Cross-Dressing. Was also involved in co-founding many trans organizations. And then you have Sharon Stewart, who is a lawyer, ex-military. It's funny how a lot of them are ex-military, isn't it? Continues to author documents. From 2000, wrote something called Facing Discrimination, Organizing for Freedom, the TG, Transgender Community. And so these two, along with Martine Rothblatt and Phyllis Frye, who I could go into more detail in some other video, but are very powerful members of this community, contributed to the final document known as the International Bill of Gender Rights. And this was conceived at their second annual meeting in 1993 at the International Conference on Transgender Law and Employment Policy. So like I said, they've been meeting, they've been having conferences, just much like academics would. So let's get right to the purpose, and this is a quote from the document. Strives to express fundamental human and civil rights from a gender perspective. Let's break that down. What is a gender perspective? We're not talking about sex-based protections here, because gender identity is based on subjectivity. There's nothing objective about it. I can say that I'm a woman because I'm born one. This person says that they're one because they feel like one. So there's really no actual definition. It's however someone feels in their head. It's, like I say over and over again, an act of faith. And I'm sorry, I don't want to live in a country that bases its laws on acts of faith. So what are the human and civil rights that they seek? Not to be viewed as special, but universal. So only a man could really come up with this idea that their rights are universal and going to bring about some sort of liberation of all humankind. And this is the right to cross-dress in public. That's madness. I mean, why would that liberate women? It doesn't have anything to do with us. So it's just narcissism, really. We get to something only a man could think to write in a document pertaining to the rights of cross-dressing men. The truths embodied in the IBGR will liberate and empower humankind in ways that transcend the powers of legislatures, judges, government officials, and diplomats. So they are going to liberate us by making the powers of legislatures, judges, and government officials obsolete. They're going to transcend these powers. Sounds kind of frightening to me. And someone was mad outside and really authoritarian. They want power. That's all this reads. It doesn't read as a civil rights document or about people who are suffering and need some sort of relief from that. It's about people who want power. And of course there's this really fun copyright notice that says this document, though copyrighted, may be reproduced by any means and freely distributed by anyone supporting the principles enunciated in the International Bill of Gender Rights. So I'm probably going against their copyright. I don't think they'll ever find this video. Don't worry, I'll make a copy. If it ever gets taken down, I'll put it up again. Because I think a lot of people get confused when we talk about gender identity and what it means. People don't understand that this was a legal strategy used to get into women's spaces. It's very obvious, and we'll go through their rights here. So number one is the right to define gender identity. And I'm so hoping that they do that for me. What is it? Please define it. Tell me what it is. It says, all human beings carry within themselves an ever-unfolding idea of who they are. Right. But you can't change certain defining traits like sex, right? You can have a varying opinion of yourself throughout time and space. Why not? But your opinion of yourself doesn't change certain very real aspects of who you are. I'm a woman. I'm Italian American. I have no choice over any of these things, right? This is how I was born. So you have a right to, of course, have a special version of yourself in your head, but you don't have the right to push it on other people, and that's what this agenda is about. And it also uses the language like we'll see assigned birth sex. It says, all human beings have the right to define their own gender identity. So this means that there really is no concrete definition, and I'm sorry, but I don't want things that cannot be defined to create legislature. I think that's wrong, and it's very ill-informed, and it's manipulative of them to frame this in a civil rights way. It's not about that at all, that they have the right to define gender identity, which really becomes meaningless because if anyone can define it, it has no meaning. They also use terms like initial gender role. I'm sorry, but I'm not born with that. It's something society places on me. So now let's get to number 2, the right to free expression of gender identity. And this is something I don't have a problem with the first things they say, but then it gets into just asking for way too much. So the right to free expression of gender identity, I'm like, sure, who cares? But it gets dicey when they say no individual shall be denied human or civil rights by virtue of the expression of self-defined gender identity. So we have to be careful. What do they mean by civil rights here? Do they mean that they, because of their expression of their feeling of what, their gender is, that they should be able to play with women on sports teams? Is that a civil right? So it gets tricky, and it's very much a legal document that, I think could only have been written by a bunch of lawyers who cross-dress. Let's get to number 3, the right to retain employment and to receive just compensation. And I'm like, again, fine, that's totally great. But then we get to individuals shall not be denied the right to train for and pursue an occupation or profession. And this could be bad for certain things like healthcare workers or prison workers. A man who claims to be a woman can just say, hey, I am this. Let me into a sex-segregated elder care facility as a female nurse. So it gets dicey. I don't want anybody to be discriminated against for any reason, really. But I think there are certain situations where it's prudent to keep sex segregation a thing, and this includes where women are most vulnerable, like healthcare facilities and prisons. Number 4, the right of access to gendered space. And here it's like, no, I'm no longer agreeing with even the first, principle that you're saying here. You don't have the right to access space. And I got to this, and my note was just like, WTF. That's where I was like, no, I don't think that's a right. I don't think that's a right at all. I think it's something that you're trying to force yourself into. So the right of access to gendered space and participation in gender activity is number 4. And it says, no individual should be denied access to a space or denied participation in an activity by virtue of self-defined gender identity. And I'm just going to straight out say no here. These men don't have a right to prisons, sports, or bathrooms just because of something they feel inside their heads. And I think some people might say, well, aren't you empathetic? And I'm sorry, but my side is always going to be with women. I'm always going to be more empathetic to women and their needs and our right to have boundaries against interloper men, even if they think they're women. I mean, it's just insanity to me. This seems like a predator's wet dream. Number 5, the right to control and change one's own body. Is this a right or a privilege? This is an option that exists to men who have money and privilege and power. This is not an option that exists to all of us. So is it a right? Should it be a right? Let me know what you think. They write, all humans have the right to change their body, which includes cosmetically, chemically, or surgically, so as to express a self-defined gender identity. And here I'm like, yeah, okay, basically do whatever you want. But because you do those things, it doesn't give you the right to define yourself as either sex, especially if you're not. So that's where I draw the line. Number 6, right to competent medical and professional care. And again, I'm like, all right, sure. But how far does this go? Number 6, the right to competent medical and professional care. I'm all for that, of course. But then they write, denied access to competent medical or other professional care on the basis of individuals' chromosomal sex, genitalia, assigned birth sex, or initial gender role. And I'm like, how far does that go? So an example that I thought of is someone who's a man demanding a gynecologist's full care. You know, based on my gender identity, that is a vagina. And either it's some kind of neo-vagina or a penis. So how far, we can't, it's legal fiction. These men have produced a document that has gained a lot of power, has been adopted by members of the UN in SOGI, and you can look that stuff up too. And it's just, I hate using that slippery slope fallacy, but it really is with them. You give an inch and they take a mile. Number 7, the right to freedom from involuntary psychiatric diagnosis and treatment. This is likely to avoid AGP status or from cross-dressing to be seen as a sexual paraphilia. They're just trying to protect themselves here. Because at this time, in the 90s, there was a lot of noise around this. Transsexuals were a novel kind of thing. And it was becoming more and more acceptable. And I don't have issues with adults doing this. I have an issue when they push this onto others and children. And that's what they're doing. And it becomes very much cult-like. And it has seeped into lots of personal relationships of mine. And I'm sure yours as well if you're listening to this. So it's just definitely a slippery slope. So they want to be free from involuntary psychiatric diagnosis. They don't want this to be pathologized. And so they write, therefore, individuals shall not be subject to involuntary psychiatric diagnosis or treatment as mentally disordered, dysphoric, or diseased on the basis of self-defined gender identity or the expression thereof. So they're trying to say they have a right to medical care, but if they're not ill, right, if they're not in some sort of dire circumstance, then why do they need that access? They're always going back and forth. They only really know that they want to be called women. And they know that they won't be, and that the whole world's not going to bend to this. And that's why they write documents like this. But it is frightening that gender identity and the idea of gender identity has become so normalized. It's like their biggest fantasy has come true. And this would also mean that all safeguarding for individuals is decimated. Doctors are no longer able to actually diagnose the root cause of this behavior if this sort of thing goes into effect. And I think that's a dangerous proposition to people who are actually suffering a mind-body disconnect. Number 8, the right to sexual expression, I don't care. Number 9, the right to form committed, loving relationships and enter into marital contracts. Again, I don't really care. We read number 10, the right to conceive, bear, or adopt children, which you guys can't do, so that's, I don't even know why that would be in there. The right to nurture and have custody of children. And I think that's the key word here, is the custody. These men want to be able to maintain custody of their children after their quote-unquote sex change. And so that's what I think number 10 is about. And that's it. That's the end of the document. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when people bat around the term gender identity. I think, there are other origins, but this one is the one that's been used as a legal strategy to push the rights, the so-called rights, of men who cross-dress, which is really just access to our spaces, as this document proves. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening, and I hope you're having an awesome time doing whatever you're doing in these strange times. If you're listening to this during the COVID scare, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. I am. And I'm about to go drink some more tea. So I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.